So we have looked at flamethrowers, bowcasters and wrist rockets, and now at last we will break down the final enforcer, for now at least, which is the Imperial Death Trooper. I am Ascendance from Fortify Gaming, and this video will be a deep dive into the weapons, equipment and characteristics of the Death Trooper, in an attempt to uncover all of its secrets. To me, the Death Trooper seems to be a bit of a middle ground when it comes to the enforcers currently in the game. It is tough, it can deal a solid amount of damage, but it doesn't really stand out in any particular way. Although its abilities are solid, and its weapon is formidable, it lacks the strength of the Incinerator or the blistering damage of the Wrist Blaster. However, it also lacks any of these weaknesses, meaning that the Death Trooper is a good all-rounder. Let's start with a close look at the Trooper's characteristics. Before star cards, the Death Trooper has 350 health. This is exactly the same as a Wookiee Warrior, and is the average for Enforcer toughness. The health regen is also in standard form. It kicks in after 6 seconds of not taking damage, and it will regenerate your health at a rate of 37 points per second. Now this can be increased substantially by using star cards, but these here are the base values. As with all enforcers, the Death Trooper's base movement speed is just under that of a normal trooper, but luckily he is still equipped with a dodge roll, which is incredibly useful for getting out of sticky situations. Once again, the Death Trooper is limited to third-person view, which means you'll be able to corner peek nice and easily, but you can't choose the immersive first-person option either. All of these characteristics make the Death Trooper remarkably normal insofar as base stats go. Before we consider his weapon and grenade, he is pretty much identical to a Wookiee Warrior, with even a very similar size of hitbox. We do know, however, that an Enforcer is really only as good as their weapon, and the Death Trooper has, well, the wrong weapon. In Rogue One, we see Death Troopers using the E11D blaster rifle, which seems to be a powerful precision weapon with some really great sound effects. In Star Wars Battlefront 2, however, the Death Troopers are only able to use the DLT-19. Now, an interesting side fact here, the Death Troopers in Rogue One also carry a version of this weapon, and this is actually the type of gun that was used to kill Lyra Erso. However, if you want to get really technical, the variant in the movie is actually the DLT-19D. Back to the Death Trooper, their weapon is kind of like a heavy repeating blaster, and it is indeed a workhorse. The weapon deals 22 damage to the body, and if you score a headshot, you will deal 41 damage. Like most weapons, the damage does decrease at longer ranges, although the DLT-19 has a pretty exceptional range, and the damage only really decreases when you get this far away from your target. Here it will take a big dip to 12 damage per body shot. There isn't much of a curve here, it goes straight from 22 damage to 12 damage over a small number of meters. Now this is a rapid fire weapon, so individual damage means nothing without rate of fire. So we went ahead with a DPS check against Luke here, and discovered that the DLT-19 can deal 224 damage per second. With headshots, this goes up to 417 damage per second. Although the nature of this gun's rate of fire and its recoil make headshots hard to hit with that maximum accuracy. Now I know that I raved in the last video about the high damage potential of the Super Battle Droid's Wrist Blaster, and the headshot values here seem to be even higher in terms of DPS. What we need to remember though, is that this assumes that you are hitting all of your shots. And now this is of course much easier to do when you're using a precision wrist blaster, which has a moderate rate of fire, compared to a super high rate of fire heavy repeater like we have here. And speaking of hitting those shots, let's look at the weapon's spread and recoil. The first thing you will notice is the DLT-19 has a standard upwards recoil pattern. It really isn't too severe, and can be easily corrected for when firing. Zooming in will also reduce the recoil. However, it is the spread of this blaster that really reduces its damage at longer ranges. Even if each individual blaster bolt doesn't have much range drop off in terms of damage, the gun will become more inaccurate the longer you fire, up to a point that only a portion of your shots will actually land on target. Once again, aiming down sights while you shoot will reduce this slightly. However, if you really want to maintain maximum damage over range, you will need to burst fire the repeater. The final category of gun characteristics are its ammo, or in this case its energy economy. The DLT-19 can fire continuously for 6 seconds before overheating, and this is really quite a long time. If you burst fire, you can go for quite a while before you have to initiate a cooling cycle. And this is lucky because no matter how you choose to cool the gun, it does take a long time compared to most weapons to make itself ready to go again. So make sure that you are in cover or a safe place before cooling the gun. I also probably don't need to remind you that no discussion of an Enforcer's primary weapon is truly complete without talking about the Overload ability. This is the center ability of the Death Trooper, and it has a duration of 9 seconds with a cooldown of 15 seconds. While active, your weapon will not generate any heat at all. You will also be unable to run, sprint or roll, however you can still jump. The most potent part of Overload is how it modifies the fire mode of your weapon. In this case, Overload works identically to that of the B2 battle droid, in that it will drastically increase your rate of fire, while also tightening recoil and spread for vastly improved accuracy. Here we can see a comparison of normal fire versus Overload fire. The blast grouping in Overload fire is far closer, allowing for more reliable damage at longer ranges. But just how much more damage does Overload provide? Assuming all of your shots hit, the damage per second of the DLT-19 during Overload is 307, and that goes even higher when you're scoring headshots, of course. This is admirable, although not as high as an overloaded wrist blaster. Now that jump in damage from 224 to 307 may not seem that huge, but remember that you will also be hitting more shots than you do in the normal fire mode. This is because the overloaded repeater will be a lot more accurate. It's also important to remember that you can cancel overload early by pressing the activation buttons again, as this will allow you to move unencumbered once more. Overall, the DLT-19 is a workhorse gun. It is not specialized like many of the other Enforcer weapons, and as such it works well in a variety of circumstances. However, it does not excel in any area as much as the Bowcaster or the Incinerator, for instance. Moving on now, we shall look at the other element that separates the Death Trooper from the Wookiee, and that of course is the grenade ability. The Sonic Imploder is an interesting one. Many people believe it to be quite underpowered because it rarely seems to actually hit anything. In actual fact, the Sonic Imploder will deal 150 points of damage to any enemy in immediate proximity to its detonation. However, it has a small blast radius, and this means that it does little to no damage against targets more than a few meters away. This, combined with a lengthy fuse time of almost 3 seconds, makes it very easy for enemies to avoid. However, those that are caught in the blast, even if the damage is minimal, will suffer a secondary concussion effect in which their movement is slowed and their vision is obscured by a white flashbang effect. This will occur to all enemies in range, even if they are not looking at the imploder. The Sonic Imploder has a cooldown of 28 seconds, which is slightly faster than that of other Enforcers, but still a very long time considering the limited blast size of the grenade. That being said, the damage and the effect are extremely powerful if you are able to land it close to a target. During testing, we discovered that if you throw the imploder directly upwards when you're outdoors, it will arc back down and detonate almost immediately as it hits the ground. The last thing you need to know about this ability is that although you can still suffer explosion damage from your own imploder, you are immune to the concussion effect. Now on to the final Enforcer ability, which is the ever versatile Fortify. This heal and or health buff will provide you with 175 points of bonus health upon activation. This health takes 1.2 seconds to accumulate. The health bonus will last for 18 seconds, or until you take enough damage to completely diminish it. The cooldown is then 22 seconds until it can be used again. This is generally useful for staying alive, and like most Enforcers, it is a good idea to use this before attacking with Overload, as the increased health will help compensate for the decrease in mobility. So with all those stats and figures out of the way, it's time to talk tactics. The other Enforcers have some pretty specific playstyles, but with the Death Trooper it really is versatile enough to manage most situations pretty well. You can use it to roam the map hunting for eliminations, it also has decent damage and range against vehicles or objectives, and it is capable of locking down and defending an area. It is probably best to think of the Death Trooper as just a really buff soldier with a powerful gun, but with no specific role or specialization. With all that in consideration, here are some general tips to doing well with the Death Trooper. Firstly, use your role a lot. It is a very powerful mobility tool, and it should be abused up until the point that DIFs inevitably nerf it. At close range, shoot first and aim second. The DLT-19 can fire a lot before it overheats, and it also has an easy to control recoil pattern. This means that you can start firing and then drag the crosshairs over a target, rather than wait till you have lined up the shot before shooting. The advantage of this is that it becomes easier to lead the target and adjust for their movement. That being said, at longer ranges I recommend switching to a burst fire strategy. This is important because without overload, you will miss many of your shots after the initial burst as the spread increases. That initial burst, however, is pretty accurate, so firing, stopping, and firing again can actually increase your DPS at longer ranges. Another tip is to aim for the head when you're up close, and aim for the upper chest when you're at longer range. The DLT-19 has an almost double damage critical modifier, so hitting those headshots can really stack up damage. However, due to that weapon spread, centering the crosshair on the head at long range will mean that some shots go low into the chest, some actually strike the head, but many will miss, going beside or above the narrow head hitbox. If you aim for the upper chest instead, more shots will hit the target, and a large amount will still deviate upwards to strike the head. Now for a little note on overload, this ability should be used to deal maximum damage to a single heavy target like a vehicle, a hero, or other enforcer, or to take out small groups of enemies. If you are facing a large group and you manage to pull off a flank, go ahead and activate overload, because that can also be very powerful. But if you're facing a larger group from the front, then overload probably isn't your best option, as the loss of mobility will get you killed very quickly under fire from even a few enemy blasters. As for that sonic imploder, mess around with throwing it upwards, or bouncing it off walls to try and cheat that long fuse time. Although it is a really good grenade when it detonates close to an enemy, you should not rely on it too much, as it's pretty easy to avoid and thus inconsistent. On this enforcer, Fortify is really simple to use. Activate it either before you activate overload or expect a fight, or when you're low on health and under fire. Finally, although that Death Trooper is very versatile, you do need to know your limitations. It's difficult to take on a lightsaber hero up close, unlike say as a Wookiee. You also can't out-duel specialists reliably at range with your gun, and you simply don't have the damage to kill everything in a room with overload. The Death Trooper is good at practically everything, but it really isn't great at anything either. Keep this in mind and you can use him to dominate many games. And that right there wraps it up for this video. Please comment below if you have anything else to add, or let me know what you would like us to cover next. Thank you so much for watching. This is Ascendance from 4FS Gaming.